Everyone wanted a chance to sit across from Doris Day, but in her final interview she broke her silence for one reason only. Her son had uncovered a long-lost recording that reopened the part of her life she had spent decades trying to protect. And as she spoke, the bright, familiar smile that once lit up Hollywood could no longer hide the truth she carried. Behind the charm, behind the songs, behind the golden image the world adored, was a woman shaped by heartbreak, betrayal, and a lifetime of wounds she never intended to reveal. This last conversation didn't just move people, it shattered the illusion of a perfect star and exposed the real story she had kept buried for years. And in that final interview before she passed, Doris Day finally opened the door to a truth she had guarded her entire life, revealing the pain she carried behind the radiant smile the world believed in so completely. What she shared stunned fans everywhere, exposing a lifetime marked not by Hollywood glamour, but by wounds she had learned to hide with grace. She had been one of the brightest stars of her era, a woman whose smile seemed to warm every room. Yet as the years went by, that glow softened into something quieter, lonelier, and more fragile than anyone imagined. Born Doris Mary Ann Kapilhoff in Cincinnati on April 3, 1922, she grew up in a German Catholic household that looked steady on the outside, but beneath the surface, the foundation was already cracking. Her father's infidelity tore the family apart, and watching her parents divorce at such a young age shattered her sense of safety. The home that once felt familiar became a place marked by uncertainty, a feeling that would follow her well into adulthood. Still, she held tight to her dreams. Dancing was her passion, her escape, the one thing that made her world feel whole again. She trained relentlessly, pouring her heart into ballet and tap until her teachers were convinced she was destined for greatness. But in 1937, a single moment changed everything. At just 15, Doris was in a car hit by a train, and the crash shattered her right leg. Doctors told her she would never dance again. For a girl whose identity had been built around movement, the news was devastating, as if her future had been erased in an instant. Yet during her long months of recovery, something unexpected happened. She began to sing, softly at first, just to pass the time, until her mother overheard her and recognized a rare natural gift. Doris started taking vocal lessons, and her voice blossomed quickly into something beautiful and unmistakable. Soon she was performing on local radio, her calm, heartfelt tone capturing attention. She took the stage name Day, inspired by the song Day After Day, and stepped into a new life that wasn't glamorous or easy, but full of possibility. Money was tight, and she accepted any job she could find: small clubs, modest radio gigs, rooms where audiences barely noticed her, but she refused to give up. Her first major break came when Barney Rapp hired her, pulling her into the demanding world of big band music. She was young, inexperienced, and surrounded by seasoned performers, yet her voice refused to be overlooked. In 1940, she joined Les Brown and his band of renown, the group that would reshape her destiny. They traveled endlessly, performing night after night, and in 1945 they recorded Sentimental Journey, a song that became an anthem for returning soldiers at the end of World War II. Almost overnight, Doris Day transformed from a promising newcomer into a national treasure. Hollywood noticed immediately. In 1948, she was offered her first film, Romance on the High Seas, a role she nearly turned down because she doubted she could act. But the director saw something undeniable, a rare authenticity audiences would embrace in an instant. And once the film was released, he was right. Doris's natural warmth and effortless charm captured hearts everywhere, setting the stage for a career that would make her one of the most beloved stars of all time. Yet behind that rise was a woman quietly navigating heartbreak, uncertainty, and battles she never intended the world to see, truths that only surfaced in that final, the emotional interview that left millions in tears. She wasn't molded in the traditional Hollywood way, and maybe that's why audiences connected with her so deeply. She felt genuine, untouched by the artificial polish that shaped so many stars of her era. The decade that followed turned her into an icon. She lit up musicals and comedies with a mix of natural warmth, charm, and flawless timing, becoming one of the most bankable actresses in the world. By the late 1950s and early 60s, Doris Day wasn't just famous, she dominated the box office. She was crowned Hollywood's #1 female star for separate times, a rare achievement that placed her in cinematic history. Her role in Pillow Talk earned her an Academy Award nomination. She won multiple Golden Globe Henrietta Awards, and her music reached legendary status. Songs like Sentimental Journey and Que Sera would later be inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. Over the course of her career, she recorded more than 650 songs for Columbia Records, a staggering number that few performers have matched. Yet even with all that success, she kept expanding her world. In 1978, she founded the Doris Day Animal Foundation, an organization that became her true passion. It wasn't a publicity effort, it was a mission that defined her later life. And in 2004, she received one of the nation's highest honors, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Still, behind every milestone, her final years were marked by a growing loneliness and a silence that unsettled those who loved her. The fame, the applause, and the glamorous narrative people imagined for her never reflected the emotional toll her personal life had taken. Betrayals, losses, and heartbreak shaped her far more deeply than the world ever realized. After her early rise, the industry embraced Doris as the perfect girl next door. Studios locked her into roles built around innocence, optimism, and sweetness, and audiences adored the image. But the typecasting came with a quiet price. Doris longed to stretch into deeper, more dramatic characters, but Hollywood rarely offered her the chance. Each success strengthened the box they placed her in, and the pressure to stay that perfect, shining figure never fully went away. Yet even those frustrations were nothing compared to the storm brewing behind closed doors. While the public believed she was one of Hollywood's most secure and successful women, the reality was devastatingly different. Her husband, Martin Melcher, and their lawyer, Jerome Rosenthal, had been controlling her finances for years. Doris trusted them completely, believing that her non-stop work, every film, every album, every public appearance was building a safe future for her and her son. Instead, her trust was being exploited. Money was shuffled, invested recklessly, and spent without her knowledge. Contracts were signed in her name, commitments were made behind her back, and decisions were taken that risked everything she had earned. When Martin Melcher died suddenly in 1968, the truth hit her with unimaginable force. Doris discovered she was millions of dollars in debt. The fortune she thought she had built was gone. The betrayal was overwhelming, not just financial, but deeply personal. The man she trusted most had left her with nothing but legal chaos and emotional devastation. Rosenthal, the lawyer who had guided so many decisions, was at the center of it all. At 46 years old, Doris found herself with no choice but to work again, not for fame, not for passion, but simply to survive. Even worse, she learned she had been signed without her knowledge to star in the Doris Day Show. The contract had been finalized before Martin's death, and she had never even seen it. Still, she pushed forward. She memorized scripts, showed up to set, and delivered performances week after week while quietly preparing for a battle she never wanted to fight. The long legal war to reclaim what had been taken from her. Her legal battle against Jerome Rosenthal stretched on for years, a slow and exhausting fight filled with endless documents, tangled financial records, and layers of decisions that had drained her long before the courtroom ever saw them. When the judgment finally came down, it confirmed the depth of the betrayal she had suffered. Rosenthal was ordered to pay a substantial amount, an acknowledgement of how severely her finances had been mishandled. But no ruling could return what she had truly lost: her security, her trust, and the precious years that had been stolen from her. And just when she began to rebuild her life, another blow struck with a force she never recovered from. In 2004, her only son, Terry Melcher, passed away from cancer. Terry had been more than a child to her. He was her closest companion, her creative partner, and the emotional shield who helped her survive some of her darkest moments. They shared a deep, unbreakable bond forged through years of struggle, reinvention, and fierce loyalty. Losing him shattered Doris in a way the public never saw. She withdrew from the world, retreating into a quieter, lonelier existence. Friends later revealed that she battled depression, her once bright joy turning fragile and distant. She continued her work with Animosa she clung to for strength, but the grief never loosened its hold. As Doris moved into her final years, the world still remembered the dazzling star with the sunny voice and irresistible charm. But those closest to her knew a different woman, one shaped by betrayal, heartbreak, and unimaginable loss. Her last interviews revealed glimpses of that truth. There was a softness in her tone, a heaviness behind her smile, and pauses that carried decades of unspoken pain. She spoke of her past with a mixture of gratitude and aching memory, her words reflecting a life that had been far more complicated than the glamorous image Hollywood created for her. Behind every triumph was a heart that had endured more than most people would ever know, and much of that pain came from the relationships she hoped would bring her safety and love. In her search for companionship, Doris longed for something simple: a peaceful home, a steady partner, a kind of love that didn't disappear when fame faded. But what she found instead were marriages that taught her hard lessons and reshaped her understanding of trust. Her first marriage, to trombonist Al Jordan, began when she was still young and full of hope. At first he appeared charming, but his darker temperament soon emerged. The marriage quickly turned volatile, with reports later revealing his controlling behavior and unpredictable anger. Even during her pregnancy with her son Terry, the atmosphere at home was filled with resentment and fear. Eventually, Doris realized she had to protect herself and her unborn child. She gathered her courage and filed for divorce in 1943, a painful decision that taught her how dangerous love could become. A few years later, she married again. In 1946, she wed saxophonist George Wadler, who seemed gentler and more supportive than her first husband. For a brief moment, it appeared Doris had finally found stability. George was talented and sociable, and their relationship began with a sense of ease she had never experienced before. But as her career skyrocketed, the dynamic between them shifted. Her rising fame, constant work, and growing recognition created a gap the marriage couldn't bridge. What once felt promising slowly unraveled, reminding Doris yet again that the love she portrayed on screen was far more predictable than the love she encountered in real life. As Doris's career soared, The imbalance in her second marriage became impossible to ignore. She was becoming a major name in both music and film, drawing national attention with every new project, while George Weidler was still trying to establish himself. His resentment wasn't about her fame, it was about feeling overshadowed by it. He didn't want to be known as Mr. Doris Day, a title that made him feel diminished, and friends recalled how deeply that insecurity cut into their relationship. The more her star rose, the more their ambitions drifted apart, until the marriage quietly unraveled. By 1949, they divorced. Doris walked away without anger, but with a clearer understanding of how success could isolate her, even in the relationships meant to support her. Her third marriage would define most of her adult life, shaping her future in ways she never anticipated. In 1951, she married Martin Melcher, a producer who stepped into her world with authority and vision. He adopted Terry, becoming a father figure during the whirlwind years of her Hollywood success. This marriage blended seamlessly into her professional life. Melcher managed her career, selected her projects, and kept her working at a relentless pace. For a time, it felt like a partnership built on structure and momentum. Doris trusted him completely, believing that the foundation he was creating would give their family long-term security. What she didn't realize was that behind the constant work and polished public image, her finances were being mismanaged in ways she could not imagine. Melcher could be demanding, and his approach often left her exhausted. Yet she stayed with him for 17 years, never suspecting the financial devastation that awaited her. Only after his death in 1968 did she learn the truth. Her earnings had been mishandled, contracts signed without her consent, and her fortune drained. The betrayal was staggering. Still, Doris never spoke bitterly about him in public. She focused on rebuilding, protecting her son, and moving forward. This marriage left the deepest scar, a mixture of love, misplaced trust, and the painful burden of cleaning up a disaster she never saw coming. It took years before she opened her heart again. In 1976, she married Barry Compton, a restaurant maitre d' whose warmth and enthusiasm brought a simplicity she had long missed. Unlike her previous husbands, Barry admired Doris herself, not the star, not the icon, but the woman. Their early years felt bright and full of possibility. Yet even this relationship carried a divide neither could bridge. Doris's devotion to animals was the cornerstone of her life. Her rescues, her foundation, and the peaceful world she created around them were essential to her happiness. But Barry struggled to accept how much time, care, and emotion she gave to them. He later admitted he felt he was competing with her animals for affection. For Doris, it wasn't a competition, it was a calling. Caring for animals grounded her, gave her purpose, and helped her heal from the wounds of her past. But for Barry, it became a growing source of tension, and by 1982, they quietly parted ways. No scandal, no bitterness, just two people who realized their needs no longer aligned. Across all 4 marriages, one truth stood out. Doris never stopped trying. She kept believing in love, kept hoping for a gentle partner, and kept reaching for the stability she had longed for since childhood. But love continuously came with complications, disappointments, and sacrifices she never expected. And these personal struggles were only part of the pressure she endured. While the world adored her, Hollywood boxed her into a bright, wholesome image that triggered debates and controversies she never asked for. Despite her talent and versatility, she became the center of discussions about what a woman in Hollywood should represent, even when that image had little to do with the real Doris Day hiding behind the spotlight. But the very image that made Doris Day beloved also made her a target at times. Especially as Hollywood evolved and new generations demanded more complexity from their stories, some critics felt her on-screen persona was too polished, too wholesome, too removed from the grit and realism that modern films were beginning to explore. Her squeaky clean label followed her everywhere, sometimes as praise, sometimes as a dismissal. To many, she became the symbol of a bygone era, a reminder of the industry's old standards at a moment when Hollywood was desperately trying to reinvent itself. Doris never lashed out or tried to reshape her identity to fit the shifting landscape. She simply continued doing the work she believed in. Still, the gap between her bright screen persona and the layered, wounded, private woman behind it grew wider with every passing year. Even her relationship with the press created moments of tension. She received the Sour Apple Award twice, in 1962 and 1964, a title given by Hollywood columnists to the least cooperative actress of the year. On the surface, it seemed harsh, but the real story was far more nuanced. Doris guarded her privacy fiercely. She set boundaries, especially when interviews crossed into territory she felt was invasive or unfair. She wasn't rude, she was protective, but reporters who expected constant access didn't appreciate those limits. What she saw as self-respect, they interpreted as resistance. Those awards became a tiny but lasting reminder that Doris Day wasn't the open book Hollywood often expected its stars to be. Late in her life, another controversy emerged, this one centered not on her work, but her family. Her grandson, Ryan Melcher, claimed he had been prevented from seeing her in her final years. He accused her manager, Bob Bashara, of controlling access to her home and isolating her from relatives. The story spread quickly, creating a wave of debate over whether Doris's wishes were being honored or manipulated. Those close to her gave conflicting accounts, and no clear resolution ever reached the public. The only certainty was that Doris had become increasingly isolated, surrounded by only a small circle of trusted people, while others who cared for her remained at a distance. Her final years unfolded quietly, far away from the world that had once adored her. By the early 1970s, Doris had already begun stepping into a life defined by solitude and peace rather than cameras and applause. Hollywood had changed, and she no longer felt connected to the direction it was heading. After completing the Doris Day Show in 1973, she made a decision that stunned the public but felt deeply right to her. She walked away from the entertainment industry completely. She moved to Carmel Valley, California, a gentle coastal place surrounded by hills, open skies, and silence. It became her sanctuary. She filled her home not with parties or industry friends, but with animals, dogs, cats, horses, every kind of rescued creature that needed her. They became her rhythm, her comfort, her constant companions. Caring for them gave structure to her days and purpose to her nights. Friends often said she preferred animals to people because they didn't want anything from her. They didn't ask for autographs. They didn't judge her. They didn't betray her. They simply offered the unconditional affection she had been searching for her entire life. They didn't want interviews, attention, or claims to her past. They simply existed beside her, offering the quiet, unconditional companionship she trusted more than anything. Her retreat from public life became absolute. She rarely gave interviews, and when she did, they were brief, warm, and carefully controlled. She avoided award shows, declined tributes, and refused reunions. No matter how often Hollywood tried to pull her back, Doris stayed rooted in the life she had chosen. The fame that once felt effortless now felt like a distant lifetime, a chapter she had closed without regret. Carmel Valley became her entire world. Early mornings, long walks across her property, feeding animals, caring for rescues, and managing the daily work of the Doris Day Animal Foundation, which had grown into her most meaningful legacy. The foundation funded rescue programs, spay-neuter initiatives, and educational outreach across the country. And even in her 90s, she remained deeply involved, finding in this work a sense of purpose that decades in film never gave her. The distance from some family members raised questions, but those closest to her insisted she valued peace above all else. After so much loss, heartbreak, and public scrutiny, privacy wasn't a retreat, it was her final act of self-preservation. In early 2019, her world changed when she developed pneumonia, an illness that progressed rapidly. On May 13, 2019, Doris Day passed away at the age of 97, surrounded by close friends and longtime staff who had become like family in her quiet sanctuary. Fans were stunned to learn that she had left very specific instructions for the end of her life: no funeral, no memorial service, and no grave marker. She didn't want a public gathering or a final spotlight. She wanted to leave the world with the same gentleness and privacy that defined her final decades. Her ashes were scattered in an undisclosed location, a last wish honored with respect and silence. Yet, after her passing, something remarkable happened. People revisited the few interviews she had allowed in her later years. They listened to her softer, older voice and realized just how much she had carried behind her smile. Those conversations revealed both gratitude and sorrow, giving fans a clearer sense of the woman behind the legend. And among them, one final interview stood out, a conversation that felt less like a production and more like a rare window into a life she had spent so long keeping to herself. In that final year, when most believed she had vanished from public life entirely, Doris agreed to one last interview. It wasn't glamorous or heavily promoted. It was intimate, gentle, and honest, exactly how she wanted to be remembered. What struck listeners first was her warmth. Even at 97, her voice held a faint echo of the brightness that had once charmed the world. She spoke about her fans with genuine emotion, expressing how deeply she appreciated their loyalty through every phase of her life. She never claimed that fame defined her, but she understood that the people who loved her work had stood by her for generations. Her gratitude was sincere and unpolished, a quiet acknowledgement of a bond that had lasted decades. Naturally, the topic of animals came up almost immediately. They had been the center of her world for so long that speaking about them felt as natural as breathing. Her voice lifted with a soft enthusiasm as she described the comfort and purpose they brought her each day. Even in her final months, her energy brightened whenever she spoke of her foundation, the rescues she cared for, and the mission she hoped would continue long after she was gone. When asked if she had a favorite kind of gift, Doris answered with the simplicity of someone who had stripped life down to what mattered. "My wonderful fans always send me such thoughtful gifts," she said. "I cherish them, of course, but above all else, I'm so grateful for the donations to the Doris Day Animal Foundation. That is what I would love instead of gifts." Then, with a soft laugh, she added, "I'm floored that so many fans come to Carmel every year to celebrate my birthday and help raise money for the animals." Those words, grateful and full of purpose, became the final message she left behind. It wasn't about fame or films or glory. It was about kindness, compassion, and the quiet life she chose after surviving decades of heartbreak. In that last interview, Doris Day didn't just speak, she finally allowed the world to see the woman behind the legend. She mentioned how the group of fans visiting Carmel grew every year, and how deeply touched she was by their love and support. But beneath the softness in her voice, there was an unmistakable sadness, a quiet ache shaped by a lifetime of joy intertwined with heartbreak. She carried the weight of 4 marriages that never gave her the stability she longed for, the financial betrayal that shattered her trust, the lonely years spent rebuilding herself, and the devastating loss of her son, the person she loved most in the world. When she spoke about Hollywood, she acknowledged the success, the opportunities, the applause, and the affection she received from audiences for decades. But she also admitted that, in the end, privacy mattered more to her than anything fame could offer. The industry had changed her life, but it had also taken pieces of her spirit she never fully recovered. She didn't speak with bitterness. She didn't point fingers or revisit the old wounds. Instead, she spoke with the quiet wisdom of someone who finally understood what truly mattered once the spotlight dimmed for longtime admirers. Hearing this side of Doris was deeply emotional. They had known her as the cheerful, sunny presence on screen, the musicals, the comedies, the effortless optimism that made her a symbol of joy. But in her final years, they finally glimpsed the woman behind the light, someone who had endured pain, loved deeply, survived heartbreak, and chosen kindness despite everything life had taken from her. Her last interview wasn't dramatic or theatrical. It was gentle, honest, and profoundly human, a final glimpse into a soul that had lived fully, suffered quietly, and carried grace all the way to the end. What do you think about the way Doris Day lived in her final years? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to click on the next one on your screen. Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more updates.